Welcome back. We are going to continue, and this will be our final session. And, well, it'll be the final session with the guest panelists, and then after that, there'll be the moderators will come up and have some final comments. However, this is the beginning of the economic context: trade, resources, globalization, finance, and investment. So we have three wonderful panelists here, and they've each been asked to address three important issues, or choose one of the three. The first one being evaluate the current economic context of Asia. What factors drive the economies of the various regions, and how could these factors change in the next decade? Second question, how integrated is Asia into the global community? Do any dynamics exist that could alter the role of Asia in the global economy? Will the region's economic relationship with the United States strengthen or deteriorate over the next decade? That's a pressing question. And the last question, which I found very interesting, and I have some pointed questions to ask if I might later, not after the students have had a chance to talk. But the third question is, how can the future economic development of Asia promote more equitable prosperity and stable growth patterns? Provocative question there. These are all challenging questions, but fortunately, we've put together a very fine panel. And what we're going to do is I'll introduce each one separately and in the order that they appear in the program. And so first, let me introduce you to Dr. Hoon Lee. Is an assistant professor of political science at Texas Tech University. That's a pretty good university, Texas Tech. Of course, it's way out there in West Texas. It's really dry. You know, Stephen F. Austin is this lovely campus in East Texas. I'm just saying. Okay. His doctorate is from the University of Iowa, and his research interests focus on international political economy, especially foreign investment, and the politics of globalization. He's published in numerous journals, peer-reviewed journals in the field, including International Studies Quarterly, Journal of Conflict Resolution. I like that journal. As an economist, I teach economics. I'm a professor of economics at Stephen F. Austin, and I find that to be a really enlightened journal, and it's a joy to read. So I'm a little jealous that he got published in there and I didn't, but that's okay. Legislative Studies Quarterly, Foreign Policy Analysis, the list goes on. Very accomplished, and we're glad to have him here. Please welcome Dr. Hoon Lee.
Thank you. This is again from Texas Tech, Hoon Lee. First of all, I want to say thank you for this precious invitation. Let's talk about money. Money. So what I focus on today's presentation is about kind of narrow down from the general United States economic policy in Asia, much more on foreign direct investment. So I kind of focus on what United States investment policy in Asia in coming years and decades. So that's kind of my key question I want to address at this time. So basically, what I want to try to do, I want to share some of the findings, some of the argument that political scientists or political economists finding about the politics of foreign investment as well as the globalization. So let me start with the general trend of foreign direct investment. And for those who are not familiar with what foreign direct investment, everyone understand what foreign? It's like Walmart in China. This is investment that firms make in foreign territory, but it's not just for making money. It's actually have a goal controlling and managing their assets in those foreign territories. So the trend of FDI since probably beginning of 1970s, it's been increasing exponentially, across the world, and it reached trillions of dollars. And when it comes to the United States, obviously United States is number one in terms of receiving foreign direct investment, at the same time spending, investing out of, other foreign territories. United States almost received $3 trillion of foreign direct investment in its own territory, whereas we spend about $5 trillion in other foreign countries, which is a lot of money. I don't know exactly what $1 trillion means because it's so big, I can't just imagine. But recent days, the FDI, foreign direct investment, received a lot of attention because traditionally international trade was the major economic interactions between countries. But if you look at the number these days, especially in mid-1980s, actually foreign direct investment took almost 2/3 of international trade. And what do you mean by that? We call it intra-foreign or intra-industry trade. In other words, when it comes to international trade, if you look at the nature, characteristics of the trade between countries, it's just basically same between same companies. It's just like a Coca-Cola between United States here and Brazil, or GM in South Korea and here in the United States. So it takes almost 2/3 of international trade. That is why it gained a lot of attention, and a lot of countries so much focus on how they're gonna, attract and achieve more FDI in their own countries. So, what about the Asia? The United States obviously spend a lot, but Asia ranked at 3rd in terms of the amount of FDI, both in inflows and outflows. United States spent about $700 billion toward Asia in terms of outward the FDI. Also, United States received almost $500 billion from Asia. These are ranked after Europe and Latin America. But the good news is actually it's increasing in dollars and percentage. So United States almost takes 15% of outflows toward Asia and also receive 20% of total inflow FDI. So the role of Asia in foreign direct investment actually increasing over time, and that gets a lot of attention. So here's a question. Whenever there is a presidential or congressional elections, a lot of politicians here in the United States talking about we need to fix the current international trade or investment, the trend. Especially they are picking the topic of job exporting to a lot of cheap labor Asian countries. And do you know, anyone knows how many United States make investment in China? And what percentage? It's actually not that much. It's only $70 billion. Well, it sounds like, I don't know how you're going to interpret. When you see the total amount of FDI, the amount of FDI in China, in and out, it's not that, huge amount of deals. Then why are they picking that up, picking that issue, whenever there are elections, and then try to use or utilize for their political advantage? Obviously, there is some goods, they can get out of, political goods they want to get. So I'll get there, especially when I'm making some policy suggestions. And clearly, Japan is the number one. They make almost, I think, $200 billion. And Japan also receive more than 10% of inflows we get from Japan. So there's a lot of trade, as well as with Singapore and Australia and South Korea. So I want to get to what are the benefits of FDI, and then I'll get back to then what are the implications or policy suggestions we can take from the general findings about FDI. Clearly, I divide into two categories. The first one is economic benefit, and the second one is a political benefit. for the economic benefit, what are we getting? And what other countries getting out of the FDI, especially in an economic perspective? Obviously, the first one is to create jobs. And as you know, I saw the brochure that the FDI creates, especially from the Asia, creating 900,000 the jobs in the United States. Obviously, United States, and so on, as well as other multinational corporations create jobs, and as a result, it increases the level of income, also help increase their GDP per capita, all these things, all the scores and indicators are sort of going up. It's not just about the money. At the same time, FDI also kind of transferring the high-tech, the major skills. At the same time, information to those less developed or developing countries. So there are some good things about, the FDI. At the same time, it also allows, a significant amount of access to a large market, especially from the developed countries. So overall, the FDI brings a lot of fortunes, and improve the quality of life in host countries. And that is why a lot of countries compete each other, especially even among the Asian countries, they compete each other to attract more FDI their own territories. Then what about the political side? Mainly the consequences. A lot of people, a lot of scholars sort of speculate that there might be some positive correlation between the increasing amount of FDI and the level of democracy. So obviously, overall, there has been some studies, debate about there might be some, correlation between the strong democracy and strong economy. But when it comes to FDI, there isn't much findings that there is a positive correlation between democracy and FDI. So there is still a kind of area that we need to study more about this political side and FDI. But there are strong findings about the relationship between FDI and conflict in a negative way. So when countries invest each other, or when a single country receives a significant amount of FDI, that country or pairs of countries are less likely to engage militarized dispute. This is very strong findings among the political science. Then why is that so? The first reason is I'm kind of following the realist argument, which is that, think about it. When the United States make a huge investment, say in Japan, and we all talked about some of the risks and dangers of war in Northeastern Asia. Okay, let's say that United States, as I told you, make a huge amount of investment. In other words, a lot of United States firms actually, acting and investing in Japanese territory. Are we just gonna, ignore whatever happened in Japan, Japan's territory, especially when there is a military threat to our own assets? Obviously, there is a strong signal that the United States military will engage and do something for the good of the asset, for the, the stability of the region. And that kind of sends a strong signal to the neighboring, potential with the country with the conflict interest with Japan. So eventually what? Those foreign direct investment and multinational firms, playing as a deterrence force against, potential war risk. So that's the kind of, first argument following the realist, argument, the realist side. Then what about the liberalist side? Obviously, international relations in 101, we talked about why there is a war. What are the causes of war? And obviously there are, plenty of explanations. And one of the models we oftentimes use a rational model of war, which is following the three reasons behind the war. The first one is what? It's because there is misinformation and misperception. And second is what? Because there is a lack of commitment. And third one is what? Because there is indivisible goods between countries. Then what what can FDI play when it comes to those these reasons behind the war? Obviously, a lot of scholars argue that FDI can play two significant roles. The first one is what? Because this is an interaction. Because there are CEOs and people across the borders, they can understand better. That way, they can reduce the amount of misinformation or misperception about each other. And second one is what? They can send a clear signal, which means we can send a credible signal to other countries. If you want to risk a war, you have to risk your own assets and monies and investment. And still you want to go war, and I mean it. Then what? That movement, any kind of negotiation, carries the credibility. When the negotiation and dialogue carry the credibility, then what? It's more likely reach within the bargaining, the range. That way, you're more likely prevent a war and conflict between countries. So that's a kind of important role FDI can play. And a lot of people talk about, the South, the South China Sea and some of the territorial dispute, And I also personally found in my research that there's actually a lot of underlying discussions and pressures, especially from the foreign investors, when it comes to the conflict of interest over the Spratly Island between Vietnam and China. Obviously, they make foreign investment in each other, and then those business groups kind of put pressure their own domestic government that please resolve the issues of difference in a peaceful way. Otherwise, we're going to lose a lot of money. The same thing with Japan and Russia over the Northern Island. The business groups in Japan and Russia, they kind of put pressure on their own government. Do not use, don't even think about using military forces because it's going to screw up both sides. And we don't want to risk. It's not worse because we got to protect our investment. So given this, the implications and findings about the FDI, I want to make a couple of suggestions about United States FDI, the investment policy toward Asia. And I talked about all the benefits of FDI. Obviously, help economic growth and economic development, especially given the situation, a lot of Asian countries still need money for the economic growth and income. So clearly, United States government should think about some of the policies, more favorable policies toward the Asian countries. But the problem is what? It's unlike British Empire. The United States government cannot drag those CEOs of multinational firms and the investment here, investment there. They can't do that these days, right? It should be voluntary and it's based upon profit calculation. But clearly there are other things the United States can do for increasing the amount of the investment in those areas. The first one is obviously increasing the amount of trade or trade agreement with other countries, which might protect those investors. And second, having more bilateral investment agreement or double taxation treaties is sort of increasing the areas of insurance the government can back those multinational firms in Asian countries. And I also want to make some policy suggestions for Asian countries who attempt to receive more money from other countries, including the United States. As far as I understand, one of the critical indicators that attract more FDI, which is critical for your economic growth, is that establish and improve the rule of law in your own domestic society. This is one of the critical sources. And second one is open the capital market. Less regulations of the capitals, and these are sort of two critical sources of having more FDI. So we'll stop here.
See what happens when you don't hire professionals? Lesson learned. Okay. Well, thank you. That was thought-provoking. For the next presenter, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Troy Stangarone. He is the Senior Director of Congressional Affairs and Trade at the Korea Economic Institute, otherwise known as KEI. And he has a very interesting background. Prior to joining KEI, he worked on Capitol Hill for Senator Robert Torricelli on issues relating to foreign affairs and trade. He's also served as an aide to Governor James McGreevey of New Jersey. What that tells me is not only does he understand the concepts of political science, he's also experienced the application of the theories and concepts in a real-world way and seeing the ups and downs, the ins and outs, the successes and failures. There's someone that can give us some insights from that experience. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Economics from the University of Memphis and a Master's of Science in International Relations from the London School of Economics and Political Science. London School, that's a pretty good university. Of course, you know, if you go to the London School, then you'll end up with an accent like Adrian, you know, and, but that's okay. That's okay. And he's also an author, an editor of many books, and a blogger. He kind of does it all. So let's give it up for Mr. Troy Stangarone.
Thank you. And I guess since we've been doing a lot of university pumping and everything, I'll just start off by saying that LSE is a great school, and there are few towns that are better than London to spend a year and a half of your life in, so I would highly recommend it. And the only thing you might pick up in terms of a British accent, at least that I did, was I found myself one day on the tube, as you inevitably, you know, run into somebody, rather than saying sorry, going, sorry. So that seemed to be the only thing I really picked up while I was there. But with that, I'd like to thank Dean Murphy and Dixie for everything they've done to put this together and for inviting me to come down today and talk to you all. Another British thing that I'm going to start off with, I don't know, let's see a poll of hands. How many of you all read The Economist magazine? A pretty good number. All right. So a couple weeks ago, or maybe slightly longer than that, there was this really interesting article that they had, which is based on an OECD study, which I've had the chance to read the short version of, not the full long version of, that about a decade ago, it seemed as though all the developing countries in the world would essentially converge with the developed world in a relatively short period of time. You had very high levels of growth in the developing world. They vastly exceeded the growth rates in the developed world. And so that, you know, all these developing countries within a generation or so could potentially catch up with the United States and the rest of the OECD countries. But what's happened in recent years is that those growth rates have dropped, and now their growth rates on average are about equal to the developed world. And so what they found is that that convergence rate has dropped from about a generation to 50 years. And if you remove China from the equation, because we all know China has been booming and booming for a while now, the rest of the developing world, it would take them 115 years to converge with the rest of the developing world to converge with the rest of the developed world. And so I wanted to sort of start there because one of the things that I think is interesting about this whole question of, you know, be it either Asia has an economic entity or has, you know, the United States' own engagement with Asia is that, you know, ultimately, you know, this gets back to what Ambassador Armacost said yesterday. You know, what Asia are we talking about? You know, I'm sure if I were to ask you this question, what is the second largest economy in the world? How many of you all know what that is? So one person in the room, 2, 3? So China is, and oh yeah, my table doesn't get to answer these questions because we talked about it a little over lunch. So China is the second largest economy in the world. And Japan, another Asian economy, is the third largest economy in the world. But after that, you know, you have India at 10th, Korea at the 14th largest, Indonesia at the 16th, Thailand is 39th, Singapore's 30th, Singapore's 36th, and Vietnam's 57th. But what's interesting is when you go from China, which is about a $9 trillion economy, at, you know, number 2, when you get down to 16 for Vietnam, Indonesia, the economy is less than $1 trillion. It's only $870 billion. So once again, you can see this sort of vast difference in the size of the economies. But another way to look at this is I was at an event in Washington with the Chinese Minister of Finance, and one of the great questions people always ask is, when is China going to pass the United States and become the world's largest economy? And what do you think about this in China? And his response I thought was interesting, which he's like, we don't really think about it much. Now, that may be the polite answer and everything, but something he said afterwards kind of caught me, and he's like, because there's a significant difference between the quality of China's GDP and the quality of the United States GDP. And one way to think about that is, China's per capita GDP is only about $11,900 a year. Now, contrast that with the highest GDP per capita in Singapore, which is $78,000 a year, and the world's third highest. So second largest economy, but very small per capita GDP. And interestingly, Taiwan is the second highest in Asia, then Japan, and then Korea. So you have these sort of diversities of where they are in terms of the size of their economy. And if we just look at how growth in the region has gone, and I sort of broke this up to about 5 years before the financial crisis, and now 5 years or so after, you also see different patterns. China was growing, anywhere between 10 to 14% before the crisis. Now, it's the last couple of years, it's really only been about 7%. Now, a lot of that is because China is shifting the emphasis of its economy, trying to move away from being totally an export-based economy and trying to become more consumption-based. So some of that is structural and transitional. Japan, interestingly, despite all the talk about Abenomics and the 2 lost decades and everything, the 5 years before the financial crisis grew on average about 2% a year. Now, it's anywhere from about 5% negative growth to only about 1.7% growth. So it hasn't done as well since then. Korea, it grew about 4 or 5% before the crisis, only about 3% afterwards. But part of that is because Korea is now a developed economy. It's transitioning into a different phase of its economic growth. You're not going to see the high levels of economic growth out of Korea that you did in the past. Now, there's an interesting little caveat I should put here, and I only know this because working on Korea, there's one question that everyone always asks, which is, Korea destined to go the way of Japan? Meaning, they're both basically export-led growth economies. Japan went into this 2 decades of stagnation. Is that Korea's fate? Can they avoid it? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons we could talk about in Q&A afterwards why that's not the case. But if you look at economic growth for the last 50 years, and I had a colleague of mine do this because I found this question really frustrating, the way people talked about it, what you'll see is that no country over the last 50 years has done better than Korea. It's the only country over that period that has basically had consistent high levels of economic growth. Japan in the first half, because he broke it up into 25-year segments, was the best growing economy. But Korea was in the top 2 or 3 in both segments, and no other economy did that. So when we think about the achievements of China and other countries, it's interesting to think that in some ways Korea has outdone them all in terms of consistent high levels of economic growth. But just a couple others in the region. India had 3 years where they were growing at 9% before the financial crisis. Now you've had this more up and down kind of thing, but a decrease towards about 5% growth per year. Indonesia, about 5 to 6% before the crisis. Now a little bit of modest growth from about 4.6 to about 6%. So there's some variations in terms of how quickly the economies are growing and sort of the challenges they face. But here is, I think, the interesting thing that we haven't talked about yet today. One of the things that will drive their economic futures and their destinies. And so I'm going to be a little provocative here, and I am going to ask a question. So there is an answer to this question because the Korea National Assembly Research Service did this, and I believe an institute in Japan has done something similar. And please take this for what it is because this was done in Korea. But in what year will there be no more Koreans in the world? Does anybody have an idea? Well, Korea's birth rate is below the replacement level, and so the National Assembly had them commission a report to find out when all Koreans would disappear. And the answer is the year 2750. And I've seen other data that about a century after that or so, all the Japanese will disappear as well because Japan faces a similar problem. But so we have this situation to where Korea is an aging nation. Its workforce will start shrinking in the next year or two. This is going to impact its economic growth. It also is going to impact what matters to Korea. China, just like Japan and Korea, faces a similar situation, but with some other twists. By 2030, people over 65 will be about 20 to 25% of the population. By 2050, there will only be 1.6 workers for every retired person in China. And the other problem China has is that there has been a skew in the birth between boys and girls. So there are 117 boys for about every 100 girls. So you have broader demographic problems, not just in terms of decline, but in terms of people being able to find spouses, which will all impact how society develops and how society moves forward. And so, when we ask ourselves, Asia, what does this economy look like? Well, it depends. Southeast Asia, other than for Singapore, Vietnam, and Thailand, all of the countries have birth rates above the rate of replacement and will continue growing at least till about 2030, 2040. So they face a different demographic destiny than Northeast Asia does. And if you look at this in a different way, Singapore is a highly developed economy, but if you move to Northeast Asia, Japan and Korea are the two developed economies. China is the developing economy. Mongolia is the developing economy. That northern Russian economy that we talked about yesterday, or northern Asian economy, which is also in East Asia, is really a developing economy. And Russia, oh, by the way, has bad demographics too, which is another issue. So we have this whole different mix, and what it means is, Korea, because they've essentially reached the peak of manufacturing, is looking to take, and what President Park Geun-hye has called, move into a creative economy. And that means essentially she's trying to take and spur more innovation. But the challenges that Korea faces in terms of creating more innovation to continue economic growth are not the same that Indonesia, which is working with Korea to try and develop a new industrial model, faces in terms of its own economic development. So we have a lot of variety and variation within the region, and all of this matters. And it matters for healthcare, like we talked about this morning, in terms of Korea, Japan are going to be spending a lot more of their GDP on healthcare. They're going to be looking for innovation in healthcare industries. So now that we have sort of tried to flesh out to a degree what the region looks like and everything, the question then becomes, if we consider Asia a region, and please note that I sort of left out Central Asia, which is a large energy producer and everything, how do we take and develop a framework for economic engagement in the region? Well, most of what we talked about comes down to two things. We've heard about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or trade, a lot this morning, and we heard just now about FDI. So there are essentially potentially three visions for economic engagement on the level of trade in Asia. One, as we've heard, is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would bridge essentially the Pacific American countries with countries in Asia. Now the question becomes once again, and I've talked to people involved in negotiations on TPP and everything, how do we define Asia? Some people you talk to would include India in that at some point. Others would not. Is India part of the Trans-Pacific relationship, or is it not? Another vision is essentially the Asia-only vision, the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which includes the countries of ASEAN, includes India, it includes Korea, Japan, China, it includes Australia and New Zealand. But even here, there's challenges in terms of how they define what they're looking for. Talking with some of the negotiators, they've told me, well, the way we're going to move forward is we're going to take, and India is going to come up with their conception of what RCEP should be. ASEAN is going to come up with what their conception of RCEP should be. New Zealand and Australia are going to have theirs. And then the one I found the most fascinating, given the political situation, is that Korea, China, and Japan were going to try to come up with a common position for what RCEP should be. So you have difference of opinions even within this sort of Asia-only track on how it'll move forward, or potentially move forward. And then there is what Fred Bergsten coined the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific, which would essentially include all these countries in one mega free trade agreement that would account for basically more than half the world's GDP and trade and all that good stuff and everything. And the interesting thing about this is that this might be the direction China is going. China is going to be hosting the APEC summit, and there's been talk about whether China should or shouldn't join TPP. It's hard to imagine a Trans-Pacific Free Trade Agreement, as we mentioned this morning, without China, the largest economy in the region. But, is China going to want to join an agreement it didn't negotiate? And that's a good question. And so China, there's been a lot of talk, will propose essentially that we take and we negotiate some version of a free trade association of the Asia Pacific. And so, there's this third potential vision out there. So just real quick, since I used a little timer on the phone here, what would all this mean? Well, and why are there these competing visions and everything? Well, if you're China, TPP is likely to cost you about $34 billion in terms of your GDP. If you're Korea, there's a small loss for not being in it, but it's only about $3 billion. The big winner right now, despite the problems we've had, and we can talk about some of the negotiations going on afterwards in the real world politics, but would be actually Japan, who would gain up to $104.6 billion. But once again, if you look at the numbers, where does everybody think the big gains, the big benefits lie? Is it TPP, is it RCEP, or is it the free trade area of the Asia Pacific? Anybody got a guess? Yeah, the last one. That for China, if there was a free trade area of the Asia Pacific, would equal to almost $1 trillion. I'm rounding up, it's 837 billion, but I figure at that point, what's the difference? Just to end here real quickly, what does this all mean for, briefly, and I wish I could have more time to talk on this, like, income equality and more sustainable growth? Well, the challenge is that as countries move to the area where Korea is, where you're going to move more into services, where economy will be less about manufacturing, there's an interesting process that takes place, which is that initially you have inequality because everyone is poor and a few people are very wealthy. Think of it sort of like a king and peasants type of thing. Then you start industrializing, and many industrial salaries are similar, so inequality comes down. But once you start moving away from manufacturing into services, inequality starts going back up. And there's a very simple reason for that, and I'll give you an example. It's because in the service industry, there's a wide range of jobs and a wide range of income salaries. And the clearest example of that is someone who works in a retail sector does not make anywhere near what somebody who works on Wall Street makes. And so you have this much greater gap, and so you get income inequality. And so the challenge is that while economic growth will lead to reductions in poverty and a better life for everyone, the ultimate trend will probably lead to income inequality in the long run. Thank you.
Brian, economists don't learn very good. At least this one. Thank you. That was good. I'll have some follow-up questions on that one. That's good. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Hiroki Takeuchi, and he is an associate professor of political science at Southern Methodist University, SMU. SMU's a pretty good university. Of course, you got to deal with all that Dallas traffic, and Stephen F. Austin's in a peaceful community in nice East Texas. It's very calm and reflective, but I digress. He received his bachelor's degree in economics from Keio University in Japan, a very respected university there. And I would encourage any high school students who are seriously thinking about the opportunities that might be overseas to get a year or two of education overseas. That would be a wonderful opportunity if you could take advantage of it. I would encourage that, even if it isn't Stephen F. Austin State University. Okay, and getting back to this impressive resume, Dr. Takeuchi also has a master's degree in Asian Studies from the University of California at Berkeley. Not too bad. His doctorate in political science is from the University of California in Los Angeles, UCLA. Great schools. Now, his area of expertise includes research and teaching interests in Chinese and Japanese politics, comparative political economy of authoritarian regimes and international relations of East Asia. That's an interesting area to me as well. And also, and this shows some real mathematical prowess here, applying game theory to political science. So Dr. Gladys, I think you ought to have a serious conversation with Dr. Takeuchi, because both of you are very smart at applying game theory. So without any further ado, please welcome Dr. Takeuchi.
Thank you very much for a generous introduction. I also echo with my colleagues for thanking Dean Murphy and Ditsy for inviting me here. I'm very delighted to be here to talk about Asian economy. Usually TV program starts with a commercial, so let me do one commercial of SMU, because here are so many high school students. I am currently heavily involved in the Tower Center for Political Studies at SMU, which is a policy institute of SMU. But unlike other policy institutes in other schools, like UT Austin or Texas A&M, we are devoted to undergraduate students. And usually, policy institute is devoted to graduate students. But we do not have graduate students. We are concentrated on undergraduate students. So all the resources are for undergraduate students, and our goal is getting undergraduate students familiar with policy-making process. So commercial is over. So today, I'm going to talk about TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, and I'm going to talk about the implication of TPP on security of East Asia. So it's an economic agreement, but I argue that it has a security implication. There are three things going on which is important for the current trend of the TPP. Number one is WTO, World Trade Organization negotiation has been stagnated. So TPP is now considered as kind of like the alternative of the negotiation of for a trade agreement, as WTO is not working in that way. Second is China is rising. So this is actually probably obvious, but this is very important factor that determines the basis of the current trend of Asian economy and also world economy. Third, trade has been shifted to so-called intra-industry trade, which my colleague has mentioned a little bit. So more and more trade has become intra-industry trade instead of inter-trade industry, so which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a moment. But one thing that I would like to ask you is, so I'm going to talk about trade. So which country is the biggest trading partner of the United States? Ooh, Canada, very good. I usually do not get the answer immediately. Like some people say Britain, or okay, it's a little bit outdated. And China, well, because you are talking about China, but no, actually, Canada. Well, I have received a few times interesting question from the students after I say that it's Canada. What are we trading with Canada? Right? So we often talk about, what we are importing from China, right? It's like, your clothes, like, you can check, where it is, it was produced, and then many of them are made in China. So it's kind of obvious. Well, so first of all, what is U.S. exporting to Canada? Well, it's interesting. U.S. exported to Canada the most automobile. So in 2013, U.S. exported to Canada the automobile of $52 billion. This is about the same amount as the U.S. import of automobile from Japan. Well, Canada's population is about 1/10 of the U.S. population. So it seems that each Canadian person might need a lot of cars, right? Well, so it's puzzling, right? So, okay, what is U.S. importing from Canada? Sorry? Oil. Yeah, oil and natural gas is the largest item. U.S. imported from Canada $100 billion of oil and natural gas. What is the second item? Second largest item? Very good. Well, I think I heard somebody said automobile, right? And then that's the correct answer. Well, U.S. imported from Canada $56 billion of automobile. What does this mean? US is exporting $52 billion of automobile to Canada and then importing $56 billion of automobile from Canada every year. Well, so that's interesting, right? So that, it seems that automobiles are going back and forth between US and Canada. What does it mean? How many parts does each automobile consist of? Any idea? Any guess? Anybody who wants to be a representative and tell me the answer? Yeah? 200. Well, answer is actually 20,000 to 30,000. Automobile is a very complex machine. How many parts does a hard drive of computer have? Well, maybe that you are now a little bit confused with the first question. Actually, only 35. So you can see how complicated the automobile is. So when you produce automobile, there are multiple stages. And then between United States and Canada, and then also United States and Mexico, what is happening is intra-industry trade, which means to produce one automobile, parts are going back and forth for each stage, and then so each automobile may be double counted, triple counted, or quadruple counted for trade statistics. So that's why U.S. import and export of automobile from and to Canada is about the same. U.S. also is importing $60 billion of automobile from Mexico while exporting $22 billion of automobile to Mexico. And why so much intra-industry trade? Because of NAFTA. And then this is called intra-industry trade or supply chains. And then that is actually the mainstream of trade in Asia Pacific. So both sides of the Pacific Ocean. So NAFTA at the US, American side, and also in the East Asia side, both the Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia are connected with intra-industry trade or supply chains of manufacturing industry. So that's the basic trend. And then the point here is, the first point here is TPP is kind of largest negotiation of the trade agreement, which means it includes 29 categories, so very comprehensive. And then one of the major issues they are discussing is how to set the rules of these intra-industry trades. So that's the kind of warm-up. So I'm now talking about how domestic politics matters on the TPP negotiation, and then I'm talking about domestic politics of the two important countries, that is China and the United States. And then, but keep in mind, China is not a member of the negotiation of the TPP, but I think China is still important. So where does the TPP negotiation go? Where will it go? We don't know, but there are probably three scenarios that I would say. Number one is, well, TPP is going without China. So it's a good tool to contain China, and then so US, Japan, and Mexico, those US allies will use the TPP to contain China. Theoretically possible, but I don't think it will work because China is the second largest trading partner for the United States, and then also the largest trading partner for Japan, and then so I don't think it will work. But second scenario, well, in that sense, so China is important, so China maybe should be included, or China may be included into the TPP. But probably it's after negotiation is concluded between the current negotiating countries. There are 12 countries. And then later, China may be invited. So that's actually another scenario. Then third scenario is actually, so TPP negotiation currently is so difficult that probably it will end up with non-agreement, so failure of agreement. And that's actually likely, and then under the current political condition, unfortunately. So my policy argument is, it should be second one. Second one would be best for every state, but the third scenario is likely. I'm a little bit pessimistic in that sense. So will China be happy if the TPP negotiation collapses because it's not including, it doesn't include China, it actually excludes China. So the agreement or the negotiation excluding China failed, then China will be happy. Well, not so simple. So I'm talking about domestic politics of China now, and then there are two groups in the Chinese leadership about how to conduct domestic reforms in China. And the one I would call conservatives, and the other I would call reformists. Here, conservatives is nothing related to American conservatism. Conservatives are the people who are trying to protect their vested interests that had been created based on the state-owned enterprise system. And then the reformists are the ones who try to conduct and advance the real reform in the Chinese domestic economy. In the 1990s, President Jiang Zemin was the president of China, and then he was conducting so-called privatization of the state-owned enterprise. And then we are looking at the statistics. I know that in the 1990s you were not born yet, but I was adult enough to understand what's going to understand the news. So in the 1990s, President Jiang Zemin and Prime Minister Zhu Rongji, they were really conducting the reform, it seems, and then we saw the statistics of the increase in the entrepreneurs, so the number of the private enterprises, and then also the number of the private entrepreneurs. So we were happy. It seems that China's reform is going on. However, recently there are a report of the survey research by political scientists and sociologists in the United States. They show that actually now they interview those nominally private entrepreneurs, and then they found that half of the private entrepreneurs in China now are either former government officials or former manager of state-owned enterprises. And we usually do not believe that the experience of the bureaucracy or experience of state-owned enterprise management is useful to manage the private enterprise in the market economy. So what does this mean? But they are so successful. Why is that? Well, because they have a good political connection. So what happened in the 1990s was Jiang Zemin, who was afraid of Tiananmen incident might happen again. That was actually introducing market economy, and then political protests demanding democratization happened. And then that scenario was a nightmare for the Chinese Communist Party. So in order to maintain the authoritarian regime, what Jiang Zemin did was sending the government officials or state-owned enterprise managers, those who share the vested interest with the Chinese Communist Party, to become nominal private entrepreneurs. And then they are the ones who have a strong vested interest with the Chinese Communist Party and the authoritarian rule. As a result, they are nominal entrepreneurs, but they never demand democratization. So that sounds like a good scenario for the CCP. Well, problem is in the 1990s. So in 2000, President Hu Jintao, he was trying to do the reform, and then tried to cut those vested interests to advance the real reform. It didn't work. He tried to, he came up with a slogan called Harmonious Society, and then it didn't, tried to seek the solution solving the inequality But actually in the 2000, from 2002 to 2012, when Hu Jintao was the president, actually inequality expanded in China. So currently, China, so everybody knows that in order to advance the real economic growth and real economic reform, you have to really wrestle with the real reform and then cutting the vested interests, but nobody knows how to do it. So how is it related to the TPP? Well, TPP is very comprehensive, as I said. It includes state-owned enterprise reform, intellectual property rights, and the labor conditions. And then all of them really influence the vested interests of the conservatives. Well, so if we conclude the TPP and then later try to impose the rules agreed by those 12 nations on China, then what kind of impact would it have on China's domestic politics? Well, it has different impacts on both sides. So on the one hand, the reformists would welcome that the pressure of the TPP on China. So the conclusion of the TPP would empower the reformists in China. In the meantime, conclusion of TPP would really undermine the power of the conservatives. How is it related to the security issue? Well, now reformists, conservatives and reformists are the division on the domestic politics. Well, there is a division over foreign policy. One is hardliners, the other is internationalists. So conservatives and the hardliners are together, reformists and internationalists are together, and then if you empower the reformists, that would also mean you would empower the internationalists. So TPP has the implication of a security, I say, because if we conclude the TPP and then impose the rules on China, then that would empower internationalist reformists, and then that would have a positive impact on security of the Asia Pacific. And then one more thing I would add is, well, currently TPP has stagnated because of the American domestic politics, and then people usually oppose the TPP because it's now related to the issue of inequality in the United States. And then also another trend is the isolationist trend of the US Congress. And then, so I would say that that tendency of isolationism of the United States and then opposition to the TPP actually has a negative impact on the security of East Asia and Asia Pacific. Thanks.
That was wonderful. Very wonderful. And I must apologize to Dr. Takeuchi. He told me about how he was recently promoted to associate professor and that he was named the director of the Sun and Star program that he mentioned earlier as part of an umbrella town center institution there at SMU, and it's really making a big difference. And my apologies for not remembering to mention that when I introduced you. So this is a great panel. Let's give him a hand. Great panel. I guess at this point, for making sure we have enough time for student questions and others who have questions, let's just go straight to the question time. And I'm hopeful that we'll have some very challenging questions for these presenters up here. Come on up to the microphone and state your name and the organization you're with or the school that you're with.
Oh, and when you talk, try to get as close as you can to the microphone.
And maybe just have them, because I notice it seems like a lot of times they'll want to come and then they'll go back to the chair. Maybe just have a line so that way everybody gets their question.
It's perfect. My bad. It's perfectly acceptable to form a nice line behind so that everybody gets a chance to have a question. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Arslan Afzal, and I'm in the Global Studies Academy at Columbus High School. And Mr. Lee, you mentioned that foreign direct investment and how it tries to limit the involvement to foreign affairs and foreign wars or such. And I was wondering, how would you compare that to like resistance from, say, Chinese nationalists who want like localism and the whole like neo-localism movement, where some Chinese nationalists are trying to move away from like foreign direct investment and the effects of globalization today.
Thank you. Well, I have to say Chinese government is sort of, unique in terms of its characteristics. There are different kinds of sort of mode of FDI. But in China, obviously extremely difficult, or sometimes it's risky to start from the scratch when you're doing the business. Because still you're not sure how much the government will allow in terms of your business or your right, your protection of property. It's not all guaranteed. And then also Chinese government, I think is still effective. When foreign firms go to China, you cannot build your firm by yourself. You have to first start with the local Chinese firm, which is you have to create a joint venture firm and then start from there. And then you can demand expanding your business over there. So in other words, still Chinese government, the intervention, influence on FDI is so powerful. But that doesn't mean Chinese government less interested in attracting FDI in their own territory. Actually, they are more aggressive to have more aggressive, more FDIs in their own territory, especially not in the East Coast line, as well as in the West, the inland side, because a lot of issues, and then also increasing the inequality across the different regions and locations. So that's probably my short answer about the local potential, the government side, whether they're going to promote or deter any FDI in the local government. But one of the biggest problems with the Chinese foreign investment is there too much control of the business, especially by the state-owned, although there is some privatization, and they've been aggressive, also sending their own firms outside, but still too much regulated by the government itself. And then that kind of deter expansion or promotion of FDI in and outside their own countries. So that's something we have to think about, and then we'll see what's going to happen in the coming years. All right, thank you.
Actually, one thing that I would like to add, that is, well, how many of you have an iPhone, for iPhone? And then what is made in which country? China. Usually we say made in China, right? Yes, that's right. The point is it is assembled in China. So the final process was in China. And then so roughly saying there are like two stages, like producing parts and assembling parts. Which one has higher value added? Actually, producing parts is has a higher value added. Actually, iPhone parts are produced in 14 countries, like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, US, Germany, etc., and Singapore, not including China, and assembled in China. So this is actually the problem, structural problem that China has, and then that's why they are still relying on unskilled labor. That problem was discussed in the 1990s. And then privatization should have solved that problem, because then the private enterprises would be more innovative, and then moving up to the higher value added stage. But it didn't happen. The reason is there is an vested interest structure based on the former state-owned enterprise, who just changed the name, but didn't change the substance.
This is Mohammed Abdullah from SFA. Well, I have a question that what are the major factors that a nation or a government should focus on, or what are the main steps that a government should take to strengthen its economy? And after strengthening it, what are the main steps that it should take to stabilize it so that it may not fall again? That's the thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are certain basic things you need to develop an economy. One of the primary ones is, private property rights. So people need to, North Korea is the classic, I think, example of this. North Korea has been trying to set up investment zones, and there's talk that there's companies from Singapore and some other places that want to invest, but you don't really see anything. But the challenge with a country like North Korea is you have no guarantees that the government won't seize your property. There's Chinese companies who've now come out and talked about how they've basically had their property extorted by local officials and others within the North Korean government. So you need property rights, you need legal protections in place. The reason China was able to take off, and this became even more so after it entered the WTO, is there was a feeling that there was a structure of rule and law being put in place and protections for investors that made foreign investors feel comfortable to invest. Now, that being said, you can have the best rules on the book, you can be willing to enforce them, but if you don't have other things, you won't be able to grow either. One of which is you need infrastructure. You need roads, you need ports, you need airports and everything. This is one of the things where China has had a huge advantage, being an authoritarian government. They could decide we need a 6-lane highway here to get to the port. We're going to just put it in and, we'll move the people out of the way if they're there. It's a little harder in democratic countries to, do something like that. But, if you look at some of the challenges that a lot of the Southeast Asian countries face, is one of their biggest issues is, they need better infrastructure to take and make it worthwhile for companies to invest there and take and, start exporting or trading with other countries. Now, the flip side of that, you said also, how do you maintain it? Well, one of the things that you often see about the United States, the complaint, is that our infrastructure is actually becoming very poor. Our roads are becoming dilapidated, our bridges are falling down. If you look even at like the cellular networks and things, they're not of this quality of, a lot of other countries. People will talk about, Korea and, Japan being two of the highest high-tech countries in terms of the speed of the internet. Here you could do something, or sorry, there in like Korea, you could download a movie probably like 10 or 15 times faster. So you need all these infrastructure things, and you need to maintain that going forward in the future. And one of the real challenges, though, as well, I think, in terms of developing your economy is, and this is one of the things I think is interesting, is that, the U.S. is seen as very much a high-tech country with Silicon Valley and everything and all, but Korea has the better infrastructure, which raises a question then, too, of what you need to do to take and encourage that innovation in terms of, how your legal structure and your tax structure is set up. So that way you can put in place a great infrastructure, but if you don't have everything else there, and if you, one of the problems Korea has is that all the funding in the past came through bank loans. And if you can't pay back a bank loan, you can't get credit in the future. So they need more venture capitalism things, so that way entrepreneurs, when they fail, as inevitably they do, they can then take another shot and try again from the lessons they've learned. And so you need all these different things in place, and I'm sure I haven't covered everything, but.
Yeah, one thing I add is, in terms of developmental stage, economic development is not the kind of like a smooth, linear process, but it's more like a, how should I say, it's like a breakthrough, several breakthroughs happen to go to the next stage of development. And so one kind of breakthrough is coming from the stage of assembling parts into a stage of producing parts. And then there is a country that is in that stage right now, and then I'm not sure, I don't know whether it will happen or not, but Mexico is actually at that point. Mexican automobile industry now is transitioning from just like assembling parts into more like producing parts. And then if Mexico is successful, then like Mexico would go into the next stage of development.
I want to add one more thing. Obviously, in those economics, there are different models explaining economic growth and development. But from the political economic perspective, one thing we add is the role of the interest group politics. We take lessons from our history, which is why was it possible Germany, grow so faster than the other countries after World War I? And how is it possible? The same thing, happened again after World War II. Germany and Japan, they were pretty much, devastated by the war, and they started from nothing. But if you look at the same time period, their growth rate is much, much faster than the other European countries or Asian countries. How was that possible? And one of the potential, I'm not saying that is always the case, but one of the potential explanation is that because after the war, basically there was no interest group politics. There is no business can come in and bias the public debate about the economic plan, economic development, which is kind of give you the efficiency, and then they come with a better idea. And then there was not much opposition to twist those economic policies. And I think this is the same kind of logic or explanation why the United States been stagnant for a long time. And every presidential elections, we got to do something. We got to against those interest groups. But I think it applies all the democratic countries. There's a lot of lucrative, motivations, those business, access to politics, get some favor in return for their donation, something like that. But in democracies, I personally believe that the party politics should be the center of the whole decision-making process. That way, they make it rational, not based off on factoral or sectoral interest, but for the general good of public. That is probably one of the most important role that government should and focus if they want to achieve economic growth.
I'm Taylor Aguilar, student in SFA. This is a lot of setup in this question, so you have to bear with me. Given that natural resources are indeed scarce, obviously, with the understanding that wealth and resources are needed to produce hard power and to maintain the U.S. hegemony and military machine and its global projection of power. Also taking into consideration China's increasing foreign direct investment, lending, and various infrastructure and development projects in the developing world. Would you gentlemen think that it's a stretch to assume that China is engaging in some form of economic primacy or dominance as a grand strategy to reach their desired position in the international order?
Maybe I can go first. Right. So as I told you, Chinese role in foreign direct investment is not that big, as update. But I saw a couple of years on PBS featuring about the Walmart. So I don't know, maybe I ask you this question. So you close your eye, you go to Walmart, close your eye, and pick any item. What's the probability you pick item made in China? Anybody know? It's 70%. So I think it probably limited to Walmart, but it's still a lot of, it's a very high percentage, right? So we do import a lot of goods from China, and then obviously led to the Washington, D.C. discussion. This is about, especially between the departments of defense and then commerce, how we're going to go about China. And obviously, there are some pros and cons about increasing trade and investment with China, because just like you suggested, there might be rising concern about the increasing power of China economically. What are they going to do with those money they earn from trade and investment? Obviously, they're going to build tanks and buy more weapons, something like eventual threat, United States and later. Well, the commerce side, well, it is not, they just want to improve their quality of life. They just want to make more money, right? And then at the same time, once they raid the pot, and then there is no incentive to destroy all this pot because, it makes all people happy. Once you're not hungry, there is no reason to go out there and then take it, right? So the same thing applies to China. We got to make them happy. We got to make them, full. So that way, lessen their motivations. So I don't know. I can't answer for that, but there are sort of two different standards we can think about by increasing FDI, but that's a sort of general trend. And I don't think China will take over just by increasing, those investment, or whether it's receiving or investing in other, countries.
Yeah, I think I would largely agree with that. I would just add, China tends to be very transactional, meaning, they go into an African country to take and extract a certain resource. They see it as a business deal. I think, this does become a lot more complex because, countries then want to, attract Chinese investment. They want to trade with China. And a lot of countries over the last, 15, 20 years or so boomed a great deal by, Australia hasn't had a recession in something like 30 years. And part of that's just because they were shipping ore and things to China. And actually their economy has become less diversified because of China. It used to be more diversified. Now it's become more resource oriented. So there's downsides to this too. But, it does become more complex because, and it's more sort of, we'll say, in the area where China feels it should have a sphere of influence. So in like Northeast and Southeast Asia, where, I've been at conferences before where, in Korea, the Chinese speaker will come up and say, you cannot have your number one trading partner and your primary security partner be someone different. And it's one of those things to where, there is a sense that, at least with certain countries, there should be a shift. But it also raises a question of, if China truly believes in new great power politics, maybe we need more of this, dichotomy in play.
Well, shortest answer to your question, which was yes, no answer, was no. Well, the reason is China's FDI in other countries is different from FDI in China in two ways. One is much of China's FDI in other countries, especially developing countries, especially African countries, is on for extractive industry, not manufacturing industry. Secondly, when China did FDI in, let's say, African countries, they bring workers together. So as a result, it doesn't bring jobs. FDI in China has created a lot of jobs in China. So that's a major difference. Interesting thing of the economic interactions is there is an international relations theory called liberalism, and then they argue that economic interdependence brings peace because no state wants to fight a war with the state that it is trading with. Well, that's theoretically true, but there are a lot of counter examples. But one thing that I'm trying to argue here is actually economic interdependence based on manufacturing industry, manufacturing products, is actually really would bring stability and peace to international relations. In the meantime, trade of natural resources will have a negative impact on stability in international relations. The reason is, who is producing those things? Manufactured products, they are produced by private actors and private enterprises, so-called market actors. Natural resources are developed and produced by state actors. So state actors developing the natural resources, they do not need peaceful environment because they have a stake when they sell to the foreign countries. So in that sense, China's FDI on extractive industry in other developing countries is not so promising, and also they are bringing workers, so it will not create jobs in those developing countries. Therefore, I don't think that will lead to kind of China's supremacy in the world economy.
Unfortunately, I think we have time for just one more question. I apologize to those of you in line, but I do encourage you to come on up individually after the session's over and talk. They'd be eager to answer your
If they're all
questions.
really quick, we could just answer it all in like a group.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just take.
Yeah, if
all
they're all
of
just
them.
really quick with their questions.
all of them at one time.
Yeah, just be really quick.
Okay. My question's kind of long, but
You must be a
Skill for
political
government
science
is learning to be short, so.
so my name is Max, or Maximilian. I go to Clements High School, Global Studies Academy. And my question is more specifically based on the fiscal relationship between the United States and China. Because we talk about how there's a strict state control of private and public institutions in China, but with China opening up mainland stock exchanges to foreign investment, specifically the ability to directly buy Chinese equities through the purchase of A shares under the Qualified Foreign Institutional Investment Program, what kind of fiscal impact would that have on U.S. and Chinese markets? Like, what are the potential benefits and what are the potential risks involved? Thank you.
Yeah, so all the questions together.
So I'm Grace Garcia, also from Clements High School, GSA. My question is, if Bitcoin was ever widely and globally adopted, how would Asia be affected economically and perhaps politically?
How would Asia be affected economically if Bitcoin was adopted?
Oh, I see.
They're strategizing their answers.
Hello, my name is Fermi Ajala. I attend Clements High School also. You kind of touched upon this, but my question was mostly about Chinese direct investment in Africa, specifically countries like Kenya, Angola, and Nigeria. Do you think China's kind of taken advantage of the natural resources? Because you talked about how they are bringing workers in. So how would that affect and impact the country's economy? Thank you.
Mahen Chelaram, Clements High School, Global Studies Academy. Before I get to my main question, I just have one statement that I'd like the judges to panelists to verify.
Interesting.
It better be a good question. We might not judge it well.
Among other factors, the prosperity of an economy is determined by the flow of money or whatever sort of bullion throughout all corporations, be it large or small. Is that correct? Among other factors, of course.
Sorry, say that one last.
Yeah.
Among other factors, the prosperity of an economy is determined by the flow of money or whatever sort of bullion throughout all corporations, be it large or small.
I mean, in a general sense, yes, because
Yes.
I mean, capital has to be able to flow.
Okay. Now, here's the main question.
I feel like we've been set up for something.
Do you think that in not having China in TPP negotiations, and China being the second biggest economy, and the prosperity of an economy being determined by the flow of money in general sense, that we are overall hurting the global economy? Or allowing it not to prosper as the way it should?
Overall.
Is with China not being in TPP, are we hurting?
Should I repeat it?
In other words, is there a negative welfare effect?
It's going to be interesting to see how they divide up the answers, and I guess it's to the panel.
I could give quick answers because I know that I've seen the study on TPP on that.
Sure.
So on your last question on TPP, the data I cited is from a gentleman, Peter Petrie and Michael Plummer, and for the most part, their study is the one that gets cited. So when they modeled it, what they found is that even without China in TPP, globally there's a positive net welfare effect. So we're not. There is the prospect for trade diversion, and I mean, there is, as I noted, significant trade diversion from China, because it's about $38 billion worth. So that's, but in the global sense, no. I can do the Bitcoin one real quick, too.
Yeah.
On Bitcoin, I guess the one thing I would say would be is that all currency is backed by a government, and without something to back it, the currency quickly loses value. And the challenge with Bitcoin is that there's no one to back it. So if, like, you know, if, say, the U.S., if somebody does counterfeit currency or something, we can go try to seize the currency, there's someone to do something. If Bitcoin gets hacked or something, there's no one to really stand behind it, no government. And so I think Bitcoin's future is more sort of what people who in the tech industry have told me that they think is interesting about it, which is has a way to reduce transactions internationally between currencies, but I think it's going to be hard for it to become a currency on its own.
I believe there's two more questions.
Yeah, the stock market one and then the resource one in Africa, which.
Oh, yeah. Okay. The first one, it's what?
The fiscal impacts and benefits of foreign stock market purchases now, because China's loosened up to where basically you can buy stocks in China through Hong Kong, because Hong Kong and Shanghai stock exchanges are directly linked now.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think the problem is none of us have really put much thought into that one yet.
Yeah, the first one, sure, I cannot. Well, let me answer the question about the impact of FDI in African countries. And you talked about Kenya and Angola. Actually, they have a different impact because Kenya mainly on manufacturing industry, but and then Angola is on oil, and then well, case of Angola, it has a positive impact on dictator of Angola because oil is controlled by dictator, and then dictator does not have a incentive to distribute that wealth to the people, so it doesn't have a direct impact on people's wealth. The case of Kenya, problem is Chinese investment does not kind of create a job there, but crowd out the existing jobs, because what China brings and what Kenya originally had are competing, and then so as a result, it doesn't have a strong positive impact on development. So that's the problem. And the last question, to answer to the last question, answer is yes, and it will hurt without China. And so I think my argument is that we should think about how. So that's actually the thing that we should debate.
And just real quick on the stock market question. I don't know if this is quite the direction you're going, but what I would say is that, this is positive because China is in the process of slowly liberalizing its capital markets. And not only have they taken in last year, expanded the zone with which the RMB can take and float, but this is another step in the process of opening up its capital markets, which will then allow not only the currency to be convertible, but for people to be able to invest more directly into China. And in the long run, all of this will be a good thing, both for the Chinese economy and for the global economy. So maybe not quite where you're going, but it's an important sort of interim step, if you will.
Very good.
I'm sorry. Just want to add to the last one. And this is very strong in economics and political economics. What kind of factors really, affect the attractiveness of the FDI. And one of the significant factors is capital market openness or less regulations of capital markets. So in that sense, stock market and how less the government intervene, how open those policies toward the capital, that's also critical sources, having more FDI. And in that sense, I think is so much important.
Very good. Well, I want you to know that in less than 10 minutes, we're going to reassemble, and 5 minutes. Dr. Murphy has commanded it will be in 5 minutes, so it shall be. And we are going to reassemble here with the panelists and have some commentaries over the entire session. So with that, would you please give a final hand for this panel?